Pedro Pascal had your girl absolutely emotional with this podcast episode. So, Pedro Pascal recently did a podcast episode with NPR's Fresh Air podcast hosted by Tanya Mosley. Let's go over some of my favorite moments from this beautiful podcast episode. And by the way, if you know what this shirt means right here, you will also know that this is one of the reasons why I will always respect this man. I love how Pedro goes over his entire experience of being invited to host Saturday Night Live and the ritual like preparations he had to go through that week to get ready for his big night on the show. What was really emotional was that the same day that Pedro was hosting SNL was also the anniversary of his mother's death. And when he saw the date on the SNL post-it announcement, it just absolutely hit him because the only time he has seen those numbers is on his mother's gravestone. And you know what? I truly felt that him seeing those numbers was confirmation that his mother was watching him as well as rooting for him that night in spirit. Another moment I loved from this episode was how Pedro was discussing his love for literature and storytelling even when he was a child, and how one of the films that moved him as a child was The Color Purple, starring Whoopi Goldberg and directed by Steven Spielberg. I just love how after he saw the film, he ended up carrying around The Color Purple novel everywhere he went because he treasured it so much. And speaking of purple, I just absolutely loved how Pedro and his mother shared admiration for the late electrifying icon Prince. Gotta love Purple Rain. And personally, this is my second favorite right here, Under the Cherry Moon, because Prince's fashion game in this movie, oh my god, that shit was top tier. I was absolutely moved when Pedro had told the story about when he was a baby, his family took him and had to flee Chile during the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. Jose Balmaceda, who was a doctor at the time, had to gather Pedro's mother, Veronica, and go into hiding after a priest brought an injured man to Pedro's home, knowing his father was a doctor, and ended up getting captured and tortured for answers by Pinochet's regime. I have heard this story before, and every time I hear it, it's just one of those stories I just have to stop and listen to it because it's an eye opener. Pedro was open and vulnerable during this entire podcast episode, and I loved every single minute of it. And I absolutely cried my eyes out when I heard Purple Rain by Prince playing at the end of the episode. Pedro is so warming, he is like chicken soup for the soul when you're sick. And not the canned stuff, baby, I'm talking about that homemade chicken soup. Straight up, caldo de pollo. And if you want to listen to this entire podcast episode, which you should, you can find on NPR's website. Again, that is Fresh Air, hosted by Tanya Mosley.